Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of fair use. I'm Drew Gibson.
I'm Dean Livermore.
And I'm Will Alwell.
This is just a note to our viewer that this slideshow contains copyright materials which have been used under the fair use exemption of the U.S. copyright law. All right, so before we start this presentation, let's kind of give you a look at our presentation timeline. You can follow our timeline based on each of our group members' colors. For example, my color, Drew Gibson, is yellow, so all the slides with yellow on them are mine. I will talk to you today about defining fair use, the fair use procedure, and fair use current events.
And I will be talking to you about who has the rights of fair use, what media is fair to use, and what is the difference between fair use and plagiarism.
And I'm Dean Livermore, and I'll be talking about Shepard Fairey, memes, in the open source movement.
All right, so my section of this presentation is up first. As you can see, these are the topics I'll be talking about. So my first topic is, what is fair use? Fair use is when you are using someone's copyrighted material for yourself. When you use this material, you don't get consent or ask permission from the creator because the work you are using is covered under fair use. Fair use can be confusing because there is no exact written rule to it. As quoted by Averhide, I quote, "Fair use is determined on a case-by-case basis," end quote. You can't just look at the copyright material and say, yeah, this is fair use. It's more specific than that. Next up, we have the 4 factors, which again helps you determine if the media you want to use is fair use. The first of the 4 factors is purpose. This is where you think about what is your goal with the media? What are you trying to do with it? Next up, we have the effect, which has to do with the value. Are you decreasing the value of this media? Are you going to be making money from it? Next up, we have the amount, and that is how much of the work are you using? If you're using a video clip, are you using the whole thing or just a few seconds of it? Finally, we have nature, which talks about the structure of the document you're using. For example, if you're using a written piece, is it fiction or nonfiction? Always remember that nonfiction pieces are more likely to be covered under fair use than a creative piece would be. So let's talk about when you can use fair use. These are the 4 categories you should use, where you should use fair use if you're using copyrighted material. The first is an education setting. So for example, our school class at middle high school is covered under fair use. Next is news reporting, where you're informing others. For example, 143 TV, which we're on right now, is something that's covered under fair use. Next up, we have criticizing, which talks about critiquing or commenting on someone's work. Finally, we have comedy, where you're creating a sort of parody of something. An example of this is memes, which we'll look at later in this slideshow. And again, this is kind of just a brief overview of when you can use fair use, and we'll take a deeper look at this later in the presentation. So now that we kind of have a general overview of fair use, let's create a step-by-step method so you can figure out if some material that you want to use is covered under fair use. So the first step is to figure out what you're using the media for. Are you using it for educational purposes, criticizing or commenting, news reporting, or comedy? If you're using the media for something other than these topics, it is not likely that will be covered under fair use. However, if you're using media for one of these purposes, then you can move on to the next step, which is analyzing the media further with the 4 factors. So in this second step here, we further determine if the media you want to use is fair use. One of the 4 factors is purpose, which we kind of already determined in the first step. So we can move on to effect. And that's where you think about, will you affect the value of this media? Are you going to be making money off of it? Next is the amount. If you're using a documentary for like a project, are you going to be using the whole thing or merely a few seconds of it? Finally is nature. If you're using some sort of written piece, is it nonfiction? And always remember to try to avoid fiction. If your work does not seem to fit within the 4 factors, then the media you are trying to use likely won't be covered. But if it is, you can move on to the next step, which is giving credit. And in our last step, you kind of figure out that the media you are using is fair use, and you can this is where you give your source credit. This is a very important step that can be easily forgotten. Just because the work you are using is fair use does not mean that you shouldn't give credit to it. So let's move on to fair use current events and what's happening today. So first, let's kind of start off with a general overview of what the fair use current state is today. In general, there's a lot of conflict between creators and copyright owners. Copyright owners don't like creators using fair use because they fear it leads to piracy. The copyright owners are trying to make fair use stricter or even take it away completely. To combat these issues, companies like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EEF, are trying to, I quote, make sure that the rights of the public are not infringed upon, end quote, by Gordon. In general, people such as scholars and us are generally confused over fair use, whether or not to employ it, partially because of confusing copyright owners and a general lack of understanding over fair use rights. So now let's look at a more specific event involving fair use. So this story kind of involves two YouTube channels, including H3H3 Productions, which is created by Ethan Klein. Essentially what happened was Klein used video content from another YouTube channel to create a comedy and criticize the content. And for those actions, Klein was sued by the other YouTube channel. Klein responded to the lawsuit by saying the content he used was covered under fair use. This would make sense because criticizing comedy is covered under fair use. Let's continue to the next slide to find out what Klein does in response to this lawsuit. Okay, so what happened was fans and fellow creators from the YouTube community also kind of agreed with Klein's claims, and that's why they ended up raising over $130,000, which is very impressive to help with the lawsuit. Klein was very grateful for these donations, but decided to use the donations to start an organization called the Fair Use Protection Account that would help creators like Klein who got sued over fair use. Klein believed that YouTube needed to have more involvement in fair use situations like these, and is quoting saying, I quote, "It's always the creators who get hurt," end quote. Klein is now devoting himself to creating a stronger community that brings creators together so that they can put an effort to end fair use lawsuits like these. So I want to end my section of the presentation and kind of talk about fair use that compares fair use today. And essentially it's called the muscle analogy. And it compares fair use to, I quote, a muscle. And it kind of talks about how fair use grows stronger, meaning that creators and people like us advocate for fair use rights and continue to employ it in our work. And when it's used less, the muscle weakens, meaning that copyright owners get their way and try to limit or even completely remove fair use. So now I'd like to give the floor to Will Elwell for his section of the presentation.
I am William Elwell, and I will be covering what can be fair use, when do you have the rights to fair use, and fair use and plagiarism. What can be fair use? Almost anything can be fair use. It could be pictures, books, magazines, etc. No matter how much of something that you use, you always have to give credit to the author by citing them on your works cited page or your works cited slide. The rights of fair use. When do you have them? When do you have the rights to fair use? You have the rights of fair use when you're using copyrighted material for education. This would include both teaching and using copyrighted material for a school project. Next, there is news reporting and includes physical newspapers and TV and online news reporting. Third, there is criticism and comedy, such as comedic shows and memes that joke about or make fun of copyrighted material. Lastly, you can use copyrighted material for research. This is similar to fair use in education and news reporting. Fair use versus plagiarism. What is the difference? What is the difference between fair use and plagiarism? Fair use. You are protected by fair use when you have either gotten permission from the creator or you have the rights of fair use. You have to give proper credit when you have used someone else's work. You can give proper credit by creating in-text citations and by creating a works cited page or a works cited slide. Plagiarism. If you are plagiarizing, you are using someone's creation without giving them the correct credit or no credit at all. If you are plagiarizing, you are claiming someone else's work as your own, and you are known as a person that cannot be trusted with someone else's work. Plagiarizing will almost always cause you to lose your job.
I'm Dean Livermore, and my subtopics are Shepard Fairey, memes, and the open source movement. Who is Shepard Fairey? Shepard grew up skateboarding in Charlestown, North Carolina. Through his love of skateboarding, he found a new passion of street art. Taking inspiration from artists around him, he would make stickers about Andre the Giant that said his name and had a sketch. He later changed the text on the stickers to obey for legal reasons and started selling them. His company was very successful, but he never gave up graffiti. He was arrested over a dozen times for vandalism during his career. His importance to fair use was that he was sued for making a poster from a photograph that the Associated Press took. The Associated Press sued him for copyright infringement. Shepard thought he was innocent because he gave new meaning to the image. So it was fair use. Obama himself sent a letter to Shepard Fairey complimenting the poster. The legal battle was settled 5 years later, and the results are confidential. Memes. Are they fair use? A meme is a funny piece of media that is passed around widely, especially on social media. They usually have a funny image with a caption. There's the image, and there's the caption. Are memes fair use? Memes are fair use because they're parody/comedy. They're also mainly not for profit. People rarely make money off posting memes. Popular social media site, Reddit, has had most of its popular memes posted on Instagram by different people than the original creator, and without credit. The problem with this was that if the people stealing the memes got a big enough following, they could get a lucrative sponsorship without making any actual original content. Nothing legally has been done about this because the memes were originally posted to Reddit will get copyrighted by Reddit because of the terms of service. Open source movement. What is it? The open source movement aims to free code for public use. They're celebrating their 10th anniversary. They're a big community and believe that the people should have access to source code to enhance it and edit it. They aim to lower prices for the consumer and create an overall better product. A website that uses a similar process is Wikipedia. The only difference between the two is the subject. Wikipedia is information, while the open source movement is code. The process that they hope to implement is this. Step 1, you find a piece of code you think you can improve. Step 2, you make your improvements. Step 3, you get someone in the open source community to peer at your improvements. Step 4, they get implemented. They think that the code itself should be fair use. A successful example of this is Firefox, where anyone with the right credentials can enhance and edit the code. This is communistic because the code would be owned by the people, not the creator and not the government.
All right, these are just our works cited pages with all our sources. And as we finish off this presentation, we'd like to give a special thanks to all the people who made and released these awesome resources for free. Special thanks to Slides Carnival and Uplash for their photos. Thank you for watching this presentation. Have a nice evening.
Public Domain
by Libby Schiffman,
Lizzie Blanchard,
and Eamon Maxwell. Table of Contents. I'm Eamon, and I'll be covering what is the public domain and where do you find the public domain.
I'm Lizzie, and I'll be covering who benefits from the public domain and how does a piece of work become part of the public domain.
Hi, I'm Libby, and I'll be covering why people try to keep work out of the public domain and Public Domain Day.
What is the public domain? According to Stanford University, The public domain refers to creative materials that are not protected by intellectual property laws. The public domain refers to everything not protected by copyright. Everything in the public domain is free to use. Who can use information in the public domain? Information in the public domain is free and available to everyone. Is the information in the public domain useful? The pros of using information in the public domain are that it includes lots of free information for anyone to use, and you don't have to ask the owner for permission to use their research. There's also a wide variety of information. The cons of using information in the public domain is that anyone can add to the public domain, and because of this, some sources on the public domain might not be credible. Where do you find the public domain? Wikimedia Commons. The Wikimedia Commons is a large collection of freely usable internet files. There are about 67 million items in the Wikimedia Commons. Anyone can contribute to it, and it is free to use. Government websites. All government websites are under the public domain. All of these websites have credible information and provide free-to-use videos, images, and information. Other websites. iBibliob is a conservancy of freely available information, including software, music, literature, art, history, science, politics, and cultural studies. The Public Domain Information Project is a database of music that has entered the public domain. Flickr features photographs in the public domain, and Project Gutenberg offers free ebooks, and a majority of the books are in the public domain.
Who benefits from the public domain? Who benefits from adding your work to the public domain? Journalists and activists use the public domain to use symbols and facts to inform the public and prompt debates. Teachers, libraries, and museums, historians, database operators, and archivists save, store, and teach information in the public domain for the future generations. Hobbyists screen old films and collect recordings in the public domain. Commercial publishers reprint old works and sell them at a discount. After the copyright expires, or you put your work in the public domain yourself, there's no taking it back. How does a piece of work become part of the public domain? 3 ways how work can become part of the public domain. The first way a piece of work can become part of the public domain is when the copyright expires. All copyrights vary. The second way a work can become part of the public domain is when the owner dedicates it. To put something in the public domain, you could use CC0, public domain dedication. This allows anyone to place a document in the worldwide public domain. If the owner was going to dedicate it to the public domain, they would have to do so explicitly in writing. Copyright expirations. Here are some expirations on typical documents. For cinematography work and film, 50 years of copyright. For anonymous works, 50 years of copyright. For artistic works, 25 years of copyright. And finally, for books, 70 years of copyright. Again, all copyrights vary. Is there a way for your work to be used publicly and for you to still have control? Public licensing allows the owner of a document to put their work in the public domain, but not completely, allowing the owner to still have some control. If you were going to use public licensing, I would suggest Creative Commons.
Why do people try to keep work from entering the public domain? The main reason people try to keep their work out of the public domain is for money or profit. When a work has a copyright license and is not in the public domain, you need to pay, have permission to use, or credit the creator in order to use this work. When a work enters the public domain, this is not the case. One of the most famous examples of a creative work trying to be kept out of the public domain is Mickey Mouse. Mickey is one of the most beloved cartoon characters in the world and makes Disney about $5.8 billion per year. Let's say Mickey was in the public domain, and a t-shirt company had the right to create a Mickey Mouse graphic on their clothing. Instead of money going to Disney, it would go to the random t-shirt company. Losing Mickey to the public domain would create a significant decrease in Disney's profit each year. According to Zachary Crockett, the more powerful and recognizable a piece of corporate property is, the least likely it is to be relinquished. For example, Mickey is a very powerful cartoon character, even showing up on many presidential ballots every year. This means that the Supreme Court is more lenient in extending Mickey's copyright and keeping him out of the public domain. Mickey's copyright will next expire in 2024, and Disney is already preparing. What Public Domain Day? What is Public Domain Day? Public Domain Day is the one day a year where creative works such as magazines, books, photos, paintings, and music enter the public domain. Public Domain Day occurs every year on January 1st. This year, works from 1924 will enter the public domain. These works were supposed to go into the public domain in 2000 after being copyrighted for 75 years, but Congress hit a 20-year pause button right before this and extended their copyright term to 95 years. Some of these works include the original film adaptation of Peter Pan, George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr. Thanks to the public domain, now people all around the world can enjoy some of their favorite old creative works with no consequences.
Thank you for watching.
Reading.
Fair Use by Sam, Reagan, Adriana, and Katie.
What we will cover, the basis of our project. Subtopic 1, what is fair use? Subtopic 2, the 4 factors of fair use. Subtopic 3, fair use cases. And subtopic 4, how to avoid major consequences when using fair use. Subtopic 1, what is fair use? So, exactly what is fair use? Fair use is a legal doctrine that allows users to use small portions of copyrighted work without having to ask the author. You might be wondering, what in the world does that mean? In simpler terms, it means that boys and girls like us have the right to use small portions of copyrighted work without requesting the author's approval. Fair use is likely known as an exception or an excuse to copyrighted work. In fact, in a fair use case, the U.S. Supreme Court said, quote, Fair use is a breathing space within the confines of copyright. However, determining whether copyrighted work is considered fair use is difficult. Fair use is broken down into 4 simple terms: the amount, the nature, the effect, and the reason. You must consider the 4 terms before acquiring information from the author. The first term you must consider is the amount. Are you taking too much, or can you add a little more? The nature of the work, or the type, the reason why you are taking the work, and the effect it may have on the author. You never want to negatively impact the author when taking his work. Fair use applies to both published and works that are yet to be published. Megan will go more in depth about the 4 factors of fair use later on in the presentation. Next. You can copy segments of copyrighted work for purposes such as commentary, criticism, parody, news, reporting, scholarship, etc. Next. A parody example in fair use. So, say for example I was to make a parody. I really enjoyed this beat, which was a part of a copyrighted song. I wanted to use it, so I pulled a 10-second clip out of it and added it to my parody. I did not have to ask the author for his or her approval, but I still cited him. This is an example. If you were to create a parody, Next, a teaching example in fair use. Or say an English teacher was teaching a lesson. The teacher could take a part of an author's work to represent the topic without having to ask the author if he or she could use their work. However, hopefully, she would still give the author credit. Next. Do not get overly excited. Before you go ahead and use a creator's work, make sure that you will not receive claims of infringement, which is to violate laws or agreeable terms saying how you stole the creator's work. This could lead you to have to pay a fine. You may think, oh, because this work is fair use, I'm just going to copy it all and won't get in trouble. Wrong. Fair use allows you to copy portions of it, not its entirety. Avoid using famous quotes or famous sayings. Are you citing the author? There's no middle ground in fair use. If you copy a majority of an author's work, there can be consequences. You should not mess around about fair use because it can be disastrous. Say a teacher was teaching a class topic in English. She copied all of the author's work because she assumed it is fair use because her purpose is for teaching. However, she doesn't realize the consequences in taking all of the work, and she might end up in court. Next.
Subtopic 2. The 4 factors of fair use. Amount, purpose, nature, and effect. Next. Amount. How much can you take, or can you add a little to it? Only use small amounts or clips, pictures, etc. when you are using somebody's work. If an author feels that you are using too much of their work, then they can sure bring you to court. Next. Effect. Fair use guidelines say that copyright owners give automatic consent to their fair use for their work. But if you take too much, they can send you to court, like it was in the last slide. A copyright owner may wish to take legal action such as lawsuit if they feel that you have violated the amount that they have wrote. Next. Nature. Copyright laws and fair use guidelines are unclear sometimes. Many copyright issues may be determined in court cases. The fair use law acknowledges the importance of allowing other people to limit use of work. Next. Purpose. The purpose of using an author's work is for papers, books, articles, website, databases, and etc. If you do not state a purpose of using an author's work, they can sue you or take you further action to court if they feel that it has violated what they have done. Next.
Fair use cases. So first we need to see how fair use cases work. Fair use is actually one of the most complicated parts of copyright law. So when it's taken to court, it kind of goes by a case-by-case basis. Before people go to court, they can you can also send someone a DMCA takedown notice. It's a way to kind of tell someone that you want them to get rid of their work because they're taking too much of yours. But of course, if you do use it incorrectly, you can end up actually getting countersued. There are 4 factors that you just heard about a second ago that are very important in using these cases, but they don't actually really control the outcome. They're amount, purpose, effect, and nature. So the first case is this Google Books case that I found. So the Authors Guild and other individual authors sued Google, saying that Google had committed copyright infringement. Google scanned and indexed over 20 million books and made part of them available on their Google Books search tool. Earlier in the case, they had come to a settlement agreement, but the court didn't let them approve it. So there's 2 arguments made in the appeal before the Second Circuit. One was its original fair use defense, saying that it was fair use and all that stuff. And the other one was that they were unable to really protect the interests of the entire class because some people did benefit from their Google Book search tool. So the court decided that the fair use argument was good enough and for Google's appeal, and the case was ended up being moved for consideration of fair use issues. Barbie sues. So Mattel Inc. or Barbie ended up suing MCA Record Inc. For trademark infringement and dilution. So there was this song called Barbie Girl that was kind of sent out, and it was making fun of Barbie. It was calling her like a blonde bimbo and other stuff kind of like that, and all that stuff. So what ends up happening is that the court ruled for it to be fair use, and that it wasn't really dilution because it was not commercial.
How can you avoid major consequences when using fair use? Next. Always make sure you are following the 4 steps. In order for your work to be considered fair, it must be transformative enough so that it can have a new meaning from the original. However, under appropriate circumstances, non-transformative work can also be accepted or considered fair. Next. When you download a social media app and they send you the terms and conditions, a part of that is so that you are able to share other people's work with it being fair. If you break the rules of fair use, you can be fined up to $1,000, imprisoned up to a year, or even both. If you are using someone else's work, but it causes no harm to the owner, it will most likely be judged fair. Next.
Works Cited by Sam Ellinger.
Works Cited by Adriana Jeffers.
Works Cited by Katie McCann.
Works Cited by Reagan Straub.
We hope you learned a lot about fair use. Thank you.
Okay, Public Domain by Annabelle, Brianna, and Reese. Subtopics.
My subtopic is on Public Domain Day and what is in the public domain.
My subtopic is about what happens to your work in the public domain.
My subtopic is where do you go to find things inside the public domain?
First, what is public domain? Public domain is a place where material is not copyrighted, a free space for anyone to use anything. The definition of public domain is a state of belonging or being available to the public as a whole, and therefore not a subject to copyright.
What is in the public domain and Public Domain Day? First, what is Public Domain Day? Public Domain Day occurs every January 1st. Works from 95 years ago enter the public domain on this day, although this rule was recently changed. Material becomes unprotected, therefore thousands of material is open to the public to use. Facts about Public Domain Day. So nothing entered the public domain from 2000 to 2019 because of this rule change. And in 2020, work from 1924 to 1991 entered the public domain. And another fact is that if the owner of a copyright does not renew the work, it will enter the public domain. Rules and laws change about Public Domain Day. There are lots of rules about Public Domain Day and lots of rules changed over the years. So first, like earlier, the rules was changed. It used to be 75 years after a work was published that something entered the public domain, but now it's 95. Every 28 years, the owner of work has to renew the copyright. And if, for instance, the owner forgot to renew the copyright or didn't want to and now wants to again, it can be brought back into copyright. What material enters the public domain? Things like books, facts, genres, plot lines, themes, scientific principles, and scientific theories are in the public domain. And a couple examples of things that are in the public domain today, as of 2020, are Tarzan, Peter Pan, Rhapsody in Blue, Pink Panther, and more. Here are the sources that I used for my information.
The public domain. What happens to your work in the public domain by Brianna Lucas. What happens to your work in the public domain? When your work enters the public domain, it is no longer protected by any sort of laws. Anyone can use anything that they find in there, so it's no longer protected by copyright laws, trademark laws, or patent laws. Anyone can use anything without asking for your permission. No one owns this. There's no artist or author. In 2024, Mickey Mouse will enter the public domain. Since Mickey Mouse is the face of Disney, this will cause Disney to lose millions of dollars because they can no longer claim it as their own. Since they can no longer claim it as their own, anyone can use it. Over the years, so as of 2017, Disney has made over $5 billion off of Mickey Mouse as their face. What will enter the public domain in 2024 with Mickey Mouse? Some of the bigger names are The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, Tarzan and the Ant-Man, Lazy, and Santa Claus Blues by Charlie Straight and Gus Kahn. The sources that I used are listed at
Where do you go to find things in the public domain? When can you go? Anyone can use the public domain without permission, but no one can physically own it. First, you should find the work publication date and see if it is published between 1923 and 1964. If it is, the work will automatically be placed in the public domain. Where do you go? You should determine if the work is eligible for the public domain. If it is part of the U.S. government or agencies, it will be in there. Solution. If none of these ideas work, you should research to determine whether the work you are looking for is in the public domain. And these are my sources that I use for my information.
Thank you for watching, and we hope you learned a lot about public domain.